we asked the question, who was Fatima Sheikh? We find out that she was an associate of Savitribai Phule and Jyotibai Phule. And if you ask the question, who was Savitribai Phule and who was Jyotibai Phule? Savitribai Phule was the first woman to become a teacher and begin a school for girls way back in 1848. And when Jyotiba and Savitribai Phule opened this first school for marginalized groups, they were asked to leave that particular premises, mainly because people in that area didn't find it appropriate that education should be offered to Dalit and marginalized sections. At which point, the interesting part of the story is the person who stepped in to offer a place was Fatima Sheikh and her brother, Usman Sheikh. And again, if you read a little bit about the story that time, you get a sense of a really incredible story of how Fatima Sheikh could go from house to house, persuading parents to send their children to school. Because obviously school was not the option, or was not something which most parents thought they should send their children to. And the other very important point of Fatima Sheikh, of course, is that she, along with Savitribai Phule and Jyotibai Phule, were offering education to Dalit sections, Dalit children, Muslim children, and girl students. So, in a sense, if you think about the constitutional principle of fraternity, if you think of the idea of education across lines of caste and religion, she was an exemplar. She's a forgotten figure, and today we think it's very, very important that we mark this particular event by remembering Fatima Sheikh. Why this is so important in today's context is I want to take you to, in fact, the Legislative Assembly session in Karnataka on September 22nd, 2022. A question was posed by Congress MLA Soumya Reddy. She asked the question, what were the dropouts because of the hijab ban policy of the Karnataka state? The response she got is that the total dropout in the first and the second PU colleges of hijab-wearing girls is 1,010 because of hijab ban or other reasons. I just saw that figure and I thought it's a shocking indictment of the government of Karnataka. It is a shocking indictment of the government of Karnataka's policy with respect to the hijab, because you go to Article 41, which is the directive principle of state policy. What Article 41 says is the state has the obligation to make an effective provision for securing the right to education. What we see in this story, of which might just be the tip of the iceberg, of 1,010 girls who leave their education, is that because of a manifestly arbitrary government hijab policy, what the government of Karnataka has done is, instead of securing the right to education, has denied the right to education on the basis of its policy, of its hijab policy. So what we see is there's a continuing state of violation of the rights of Muslim girls to education, to dignity, to expression, and to non-discrimination. And we also see that this policy which is in place, which constitutionality was upheld by the Karnataka High Court, is still in place. So that particular policy continues, and the violation continues for new generations of students by a policy which, in my opinion, and I think in the opinion of the fact-finding team, which I'll get to in a minute, is really unconscionable. Again, if we go back a little bit, what we see is that this policy's constitutionality is upheld by the Karnataka High Court. It goes before the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court delivers a split verdict. Justice Gupta upholds the constitutionality of the policy prohibiting the hijab, and Justice Dhulia strikes down the government notification. I just want to mention one important point about Justice Dhulia's opinion, which I think is important to recognize, is Justice Dhulia gets this discussion from the abstract to the concrete. He begins in his judgment by referencing the two girls, Aisha Shifa and Terina Begum, who were the second year students of the government pre-university college in Kundapura, who were one fine day stopped from entering the college because they're wearing hijab. No notice, no policy, just stopped. And he says the government produced an ex post facto justification for the illegal action by passing a government order which allowed for the prohibition of the wearing of the hijab. He says, what is the result of this policy? Again, it's worth reading the judgment in closely. He says the result of this policy is that girl students have not been able to appear in the board examinations. Many others were forced to seek transfer to other schools, most likely madrasas, where they may not get the same standard of education. This, for a girl child for whom it was never easy in the first place to reach a school gate. This is the other opinion in the split opinion delivered by the Supreme Court. So the position now, the legal position now, is the matter is now placed before the Chief Justice to consider an appropriate bench. It is our submission based on what you're going to hear now, right? Why it's imperative, it's absolutely imperative that the Supreme Court hear this matter at the earliest stage, because there's a continuing state of violation of the rights of the Muslim girl students. My colleagues will do now is will take you through in some detail as to what is the kind of violation which Muslim girl students have suffered. What is the responsibility of the government of Karnataka for this continuing state of violation? Or what has the government of Karnataka done to perpetuate the state of violation? What is the role of some sections of the media in allowing for this continuing state of violation? And finally, what has civil society done about this entire state of violation? And what should now be the position or the opinion taken by the government of Karnataka? What should the government of Karnataka move towards? To do this, I will pass the floor over to two colleagues, Purna Ravishankar as well as Aishwarya Ravikumar, who are both part of an incredible fact-finding, looking at the kinds of violations suffered by Muslim girls over the long period of time, and trying to make the case that we need to do something about this. Without further ado, I'll hand the floor over to Purna, who will take you through some part of what the fact-finding team did to document and try and redress this continuing state of unconscionable violation. Purna, floor is now yours.
Thank you, Arvind. Eldrigu Namaskara. On behalf of the entire PUCL team consisting of Aishwarya, who's with us on this call, Kishore, Ramdas, Shashank and me, who are also on this call, I'd like to thank all of you for joining us today for this very important press conference. And like Arvind was saying, I will be walking you through some of the findings that we had with respect to the violations of the girls and of the girls' rights. And just yesterday in Karnataka, most newspapers carried this very important statistic, which pointed to how minority students from those districts in Karnataka where the entire issue of the hijab had started, have now started to move to private educational institutions. And this was actually a trend that we had noticed when we were speaking to students, teachers, and other stakeholders. And now we have data also to establish that this is indeed something that's happening across districts. And this newspaper report, which was carried by various dailies, pointed to how the enrollment of minority students in government institutions has almost dropped by half. This is an extremely grave situation, especially because of the things that Arvind also spoke to us about, is the state's duty actually to bring students into classrooms and to make government institutions accessible. and this is their constitutional mandate. But on the contrary, now they're driving students, especially women and especially women from minority communities, out of classrooms and out of institutions. And in many ways, this is unprecedented. This is perhaps the first time since independence that state machinery is acting to throw students out of classrooms and out of educational spaces rather than bring them into it. Why this also becomes important is because government institutions are like a mini India, right, where you have space for people from different communities, diverse backgrounds, etc., to come together and pursue an education together. But now you have educational institutions, especially state-run ones, where students are being segregated on the basis of religion. And what this statistic also points to is that a lot of the students who've been affected by this de facto ban on the hijab are moving out of government institutions precisely because of the multifarious manner in which their rights have been violated, their multiple constitutional rights that have been completely taken away from them. And what we have to also pay attention to is the fact that those who have moved to minority institutions, it is a shame that they have had to do that. They should have had the option to continue if they wish to. But what is even more worrying is that we don't have state figures. We don't have government data on what is the total number of dropout from educational institutions. And the government does not seem to be bothered to even find out why this has happened and how many children have been thrown out of educational institutions. And through our work in some of these districts, when we spoke to the educational department, they too told us that they have not really been able to follow up with higher authorities in the state. Perhaps Aishwarya will speak about it when she's making her points about the report. What I want to draw your attention to is also the chaos that unfolded once the government order dated 5/2/2002 came out, and there were subsequent announcements by the state government about how hijab will not be allowed in examination centers. Now, both the government order and the interim order and even the final order of the Honorable High Court of Karnataka had stated very clearly that only in institutions where where there is a prescribed uniform and that uniform says that the hijab will not be allowed, students will not have an opportunity to attend classes with the hijab on. But when the state government was talking about this, they went around telling in the media that hijab will not be allowed for teachers in examination centers, in the premises of the educational institutions, so on and so forth. In many senses, moving beyond the ambit of the High Court order. And we on the ground saw how this affected students in whose institutions, for example, the hijab was allowed. Their CDCs did not mandate a ban on the hijab, but because the government had actively misinterpreted the High Court order, they could not appear for their examinations because the exam centers were not letting them enter the exam halls. Now, for example, in one district, the girls were appearing for their final semester examination, but the college management told them that they could not sit for exams because they had the hijab on. And after a long process of negotiation, the college made them forcefully sign a letter which said that we are being allowed to write this exam on humanitarian grounds, and once we finish writing this exam, we're going to take our TCs and go to a different college, to a different institution. And in many senses, these students were held ransom so that they can they are able to exercise their right to education, that they are able to sit for their exams. And when they persisted with the college authorities, they were told that you are doing a lot of natak and these kind of things will not be tolerated. So on the front of education, because of rampant misuse and misinterpretation of the interim order and also the final order, the girls were not able to do something as simple as sit for their exams. And on the question of, the very important question of dignity, we found that Muslim women were thrown out of all spaces in the society, including their educational institutions, where they felt threatened by their own classmates who were sending them lewd messages inciting violence against them. They felt that classrooms were extremely scary spaces, horrible spaces where they felt horrified, and they wanted to go into classrooms in groups. Their hands would tremble when they went into classrooms, fearing what the response of the teachers and the management would be. So in many senses, the college environment was hostile. But even in public spaces, they told us that they feel like more eyes are on them than ever before, because they are Muslim women who choose to observe the hijab. Even on social media, which the girls said that, the girls of 16, 17 who use social media for entertainment, to be able to express themselves, a space where they can be themselves, even those spaces had turned extremely violent and hostile for them, where their own classmates were now putting up saffron flags and, were putting up proud pictures of themselves in saffron shawls, saying how they had stopped girls in the college from, entering classrooms and entering their educational institutions. So in many senses, every right of these girls was violated, starting from the right to education, their right to dignity, their right to practice their religion, their faith, their right to express themselves, their privacy, their autonomy in every way. And what is more, the most shocking part of all of this is the fact that the state machinery was, in a very concerted way going after not just the girls, but the entire Muslim community. And that's what, was the most clinching kind of finding for us, that it was the state machinery that was acting in full force to ensure that these girls feel cornered and are thrown out of their educational institutions. My colleague Aishwarya will perhaps give us more detail about, the role of the police and the educational institutions and the state itself. So over to you, Aishwarya.
Thank you. I will be talking about the state authorities, and at the very top of the chain is the Minister of Primary and Secondary Education, Mr. B.C. Nagesh, whose statements had set off, whose outrageous statements to the media and very regular statements to the media kept misinterpreting the High Court order, kept encouraging a set of actions on the ground at the district level, which violated the rights of Muslim women students. I'll just get into a little bit of a detail about that now. Now, while the judgment and while the ban on the hijab, we as PUCL do believe that such a restriction on the hijab is completely unconstitutional based on what Purna has just told us. There are 2 points to remember when we're talking about role of state authorities. One is that there was no real directive from the High Court to immediately and compulsorily impose the ban. There was no such directive to do it even before the end of the academic year, to do it at one stroke, to do it in all colleges and without passing any resolution. The second point is that even what was written in the High Court order was very, very blatantly misinterpreted. The misinterpretation happened from the minister to the state government, Secretary of the Education Department. There was Commissioner of Collegiate Education and Public Instruction. And at the district level, we have spoken to deputy commissioners, we have spoken to the police, we've spoken to the Deputy Director of Public Instruction and Primary Education, as well as principals. The misinterpretation of the High Court order, while is the key of the issue, the manner in which they have violated the rights of Muslim women students is very important for us to keep in mind. The first thing is that this action, this enforcement of this ban in one stroke happened without any written orders. There were no written restrictions, and the principals told us this. Deputy commissioners of the district, or the highest administrative head, they told us that higher authorities gave us instructions. So we held a video conference with all principals. There's no circular to show, there's no order to show, and these were instructions given orally to immediately impose a sweeping ban. And the principals told us this too. The second thing is to note the extremely prejudiced and biased administration that we have, not only from the government, even at the college level, whether it's principals, whether it's deputy commissioners, they spoke with extreme prejudices about the Muslim women students. And they said that they're so backward because they're insisting on the hijab. They're so backward because they're choosing their hijab over their education. And they've spoken again, time and again, about the Muslim community with this language. The third thing is that their course of action was in the manner of convincing Muslim parents and Muslim students. They tried to convince the parents and students to adhere to this sweeping imposed ban. They convinced them, they in quotes convinced, because that is not their job. They convinced them time and again, saying that there is no option for you if you want to continue coming to college, if you want to write your examination. This is more important, so remove your hijab. These are extremely illegal actions taken by administrative officials at both the district level and at the college level. And the last thing is, there was absolutely no recourse, no process allowed for students and parents to voice their grievances, to request for even at least being seated in a manner in which they don't feel humiliated, they don't feel harassed. They didn't want to remove their hijab outside the college gates, or they wanted a separate room. Every single step of the way was struggle and negotiation with the help of local civil society for parents and students. So we can understand. So when the judgment is saying that the judgment has not issued an immediate directive to immediately and compulsory enforce the ban. And when they have taken these kind of actions, we have to infer that they have deliberately chosen to exclude Muslim women students from institutions. They've deliberately chosen to kick them out of public spaces. And the police, coming to the police, while they have the responsibility to make all citizens feel safe, they've done nothing but endanger the security of Muslim women students. Their presence in educational institutions, their presence outside college gates, hand in hand with the media, hand in hand with the college principals, telling students to remove their hijab is completely outside their mandated responsibility. This is not their job. They shouldn't have been there. And their presence only intimidated students. It caused an extremely hostile climate, and students were very scared. Students reported time and again to us that the police were taking photos of us. The police was walking in our corridors and they were staring at us. This made us feel scared. And this was a very common this was a very common testimony from all the districts that we've spoken to, where students have shared this very scary experience of feeling comfortable even in their own classrooms. And the next thing that I would like to talk about is the role of these groups under the Hindutva organizations. There were nothing more than vigilante groups. They incited hatred in the minds of very young people. And of course, this comes from the larger context of a larger project of saffronization of educational institutions. But what they're doing here is very important for us to note and resist, because what they're doing here is at a very young age, at a crucial age, they're affecting the minds of young people, and they're inciting hatred in the minds of young students, and they're bringing hijab and saffron and hijab and sindoor as actual opposing things to compare. We cannot even dignify this comparison with a response, because these are not comparable. And one more thing to note is that they actively compelled authorities, and they filed complaints against students and teachers who were protesting the ban, who were trying to help Muslim women students. They were compelling authorities to enforce the ban continuously. And Mangalore University is a very brilliant case study, which is also noted in our report, where there were time and again, there were ABVP organized protests with saffron shawls in campuses, just pushing the administration to enforce the ban and no longer permit students with hijab. Of course, their actions on social media, where they spread fake news and they constantly connected Muslim women students to terrorist organizations and linking it to jihad, and really harassing and humiliating Muslim women students in campuses. These are very important things that we have to keep remembering and resisting, because these are also recorded in the report as sort of how they mobilized, how the ABVP activated non-Muslim students and Hindu students in campuses. It is very important for us to note how important their role was, and it was central to the enforcement of this ban. And the last thing is the media. The media at that time were acting as vigilantes to themselves by chasing young minor students, by taking the cameras into campuses where their minor students and their students with their hijab, the students removing their hijab. These are visuals that were widely broadcasted on a loop, on loops on news channels. These are actions of the media that that violated the rights of Muslim women to privacy and dignity continuously on a daily basis. And the comments that news channels and media, TV media, especially Kannada TV media, which this report focuses on, the kind of commentary that was made about Muslim women students who were protesting against the ban, and how they were linked to, again, larger fundamentalist groups, and there's a bigger conspiracy, and this is threatening the Hindu religion. They acted as nothing more than an arm of the vigilante groups under the Hindutva. This caused severe psychological distress to students we have spoken to, and we have to remember their voices while we are talking about the role of all these authorities, all these bodies, all these groups, because their distress is still the point of our concern. Their distress is still the reason why we're doing this today. Thank you.
Purna, do you want to comment now on the role of civil society in this difficult situation?
Sure. So this is something that we had, we'd been asked many times, in many of the districts and with many groups that we had interacted. They said, some of the community members and leaders that we were speaking to, and they said, it's all well and good that PUCL has initiated this effort and you're looking into what has happened on the ground with respect to the hijab, but where were you when we were facing the heat all by ourselves, isolated and alienated, cut off from the rest of society, in Jan, Feb and March? This is one question that we had to continuously face. And in a sense, while we in this report try and document and acknowledge the fact that there are various groups, at different points in the last 1 year who have made an effort to stand with the community, it was also it's also an important moment of introspection for us, because we felt that while there were groups that were extending support, it felt like that support was coming in spurts, and it was not necessarily enough, but there were attempts made in different parts of the state. And it also, of course, without doubt, we must acknowledge that the Muslim women, especially across the state, have stood up with a lot of courage, grace, and dignity. And some parts of the civil society have attempted to, extend their support. I'd like to speak about two significant interventions that were made. One was a group based in Bangalore called Bahutva Karnataka that wrote to the KSC-PCR, the Child Rights Commission in Karnataka, which, after receiving the letter from Bahutva Karnataka, recognized that stopping women at, the gates of college institutions is both humiliating and is a violation of their fundamental right to education and dignity. And at the same time, it made, 3 recommendations to the education department. One was to permit the women to appear for examinations. 2 was to evaluate their mental health and make sure that they are given counseling. And 3, of course, was to, make sure that they put out circulars clarifying the order of the High Court. This was an important thing to do. And the second one was a lawyers group called ILAJ, which sent out a legal notice to BC Nagesh. Aishwarya was also alluding to him, who routinely gave out misleading statements in the media. And in a sense, he misled, he was leading this entire exercise of, misrepresenting the High Court order in public. And this civil society group, in fact, issued a legal notice to him asking him to immediately withdraw these statements because they were causing damage on the ground. In one instance in Gadag, teachers were suspended for allowing students to appear for exams with their hijabs, and whereas there was no, restriction on it, like Aishwarya was also pointing out, even by the High Court. So these were 2 important kind of civil society initiatives that, I wanted to bring out, which we've also documented in the report.
Thank you. Thanks to both Purna and Aishwarya for really taking us through some dimensions of the report. It's a long report, so I urge everybody to read it to get a sense of the extent of work which has really been done in understanding the nature of violation, understanding the complicity of the state, the role of the media, and the role of vigilante forces in the series of violations. Now, I'd like to invite Shaima Amatullah, who's a PhD scholar at NIAS and also been associated with the report, to respond in a sense to some of the concerns and issues which have been thrown up by both Purna and Aishwarya in the course of the presentation. Shaima, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Arvind. Thank you all at PUCL for having me here, and many congratulations to the team for a brilliant job and brilliant work that has come out. I hope I'm audible and clear. Yeah. Okay. So I think I'll pick up from what Aishwarya and Purna had to say before, which they've already discussed in great length. So I had like two major themes that I wanted to sort of pick up and speak on. So the first thing was about the denying of agency, which the report also mentioned, denying agency of Muslim women. So by imposing that now the hijab is oppressive, like even the report, there's a mention of the Iran and India example, that asking women to wear or to remove, both are actually a denial of their agency. So we must keep in mind that Muslim girls or women in India are not a heterogeneous group, and they cannot be clubbed under one category. That is so important to note because they belong to different socio-economic classes, different regional, religious, cultural, sorry, not religious, regional, cultural backgrounds, different mother tongues. They are a variety of different, arenas that they come from. It's just not about being Muslim woman. It cannot be clubbed under one category. And even if, all of two people come from the similar sort of, all of these things are taken into account, and even if they are similar in a lot of respects, still their outlook on hijab can, it can vary. It may not be the same, because in my research work, I met students or girls who belong to the same family, but still their views on hijab were different. So it was not that they had the same views. So this is something that we must acknowledge and accept, that young people make different choices for themselves, and it's true for many other choices that young people make. It's not just necessarily about the hijab, and one cannot expect that all of them will be uniform or they'll be similar. So often the question is being asked, why do some people wear it? It's not part of religion, it is part of religion. The argument itself is sort of on a baseless premise, because young people make different choices and they're bound to be different from each other. And by saying this, the more important thing that I wanted to say was that despite the difference in clothing, in hobbies, in food habits, or whatever the differences are, people have coexisted together, and they've lived in same colleges, same neighborhoods, and they've lived together. So it has never been a deterrent for people to live together and coexist. Because living in a country like India, it's synonymous to living with diversity. I think we've all lived and coexisted with people who are different from us, and there's nothing so unusual about it. So the display of religious symbols, if you sit in an auto, you go to a Xerox shop, you go to a shopping mall, you go to a hospital, you will always see all our social spaces which are percolated with a number of religious symbols. This has never been an odd thing for any of us. So it's very, there, and it has never caused any disturbance, nor it has been something odd. We've always lived with diversity, and that's how the Constitution also talks about pluralism or secularism, in that sense that we've been able to sort of live with this kind of diversity, and it's not been unusual. So the question is, why is this question coming up now? So I think in the report, and as well as both of them already spoke about how a systematic effort is being made into, being targeting certain groups or certain way of, certain kinds of violences targeted to different members of this community, like mob lynching or whatever it may be. So if we situate the hijab controversy, whatever issue, into this larger picture, then it is then we can see that there are multiple levels at which this is happening. It's just not at one level. So it is even from the textbooks, in the education, to outside of education, to trade, to different levels that is happening, and this is also a part of it. So it's been happening for a while, and it's continuing to happen in different forms, and it is being sanctioned and approved, and it's continuing. So that's one thing. The second thing that I wanted to sort of highlight, I think we've sort of discussed about it a little, framing this issue of hijab versus education, thinking of the hijab as backward, oppressive, regressive versus something that cannot fit into the idea of modern education, right? This has been always a topic of debate, whether it's, oppressive, backward, and all of that. But if we turn towards research and we look at this question, in fact, we'll find something which is the opposite. That means that once the school or the education system is divorcing the child from his background, home, or any community experiences, the learning outcomes have been poorer. Whereas when the school is being accommodative, taking into consideration the child's background and being able to accommodate, the outcomes have been much better. So I think this part is very important because a lot of countries have understood this, and they're spending huge amount of money to design inclusive curriculums, because they know now that it's not they're spending so much money on making inclusive curriculums because they are aware that this will lead to improved learning outcomes. And also, like UN Declaration of Minorities also says that the promotion and protection of the rights of persons belonging to minorities contribute to the political and social stability of the countries in which they live. Right. So this is part of United Nations Declaration, and it is important. I want to move away from the question of just this being a Muslim issue, because the economic development or growth of any country slow down if some groups are going to be left out from this picture. Right. So there's been an understanding in a lot of developed and developing countries that when you ensure rights of minorities and you acknowledge that equality and dignity of all individuals, this increases participatory development, and then this also decreases the tensions among groups and individuals. So these are important factors for maintaining stability and peace. So this has been recognized by a number of countries, and they are making efforts, because in a world like today's, we have a lot of migration, and we have different in a different light you may be a minority, in a different light you may be a majority. So there is an effort towards building more inclusive environments and for the betterment of generally people, societies, and their countries, right? So I think we must also place this question about these things to our own country. So where are our resources being spent? Are these leading to more progress? Are these leading to peace, or are they building a more hostile environment for our youth? Where are we heading towards, and where are the efforts going into? Because a lot of energy, effort, money, everything is being spent on such a cause. So I'm just still leaving, all of us with this question as to questioning our own, how our country's progress is. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Shaima, for that, for this sharing, for the very moving sharing, and for, in a sense, also guiding, I think, the team members through this entire process of thinking about what the meaning of the hijab might be. And thank you for saying that we must refuse this false polarity between education and religion, and the fact that the title, in a sense, reflects the fundamental thesis that you can't close the gates of education to anybody, and that's fundamental, and that's the fundamental constitutional responsibility of a government. We now open it out to friends, colleagues who might have any questions they might want to ask the team members. Please type in your questions in the chat, and our colleagues and friends will answer the questions that you put forward. Can we begin with the first question, perhaps? Unless one of you all wants me to take that.
Can you just read it out?
Oh yeah,
because I don't think we can see it. Yeah, we can see it.
Let me read it out. Ashwak from the Bangalore Akbar channel says the matter of the hijab ban is with the apex court. What are the viable options to immediately get an interim relief to restore wearing of the hijab? Also, how can a petition be filed for urgent hearing? Since I talked about the legal part, I'll just mention it, and please, both of you, please feel free to come in as well. The matter is now placed before the Chief Justice for constitutional of an appropriate bench. It is now the Chief Justice's discretion to constitute that particular bench. And what we see as our role in the meantime is to raise awareness on the entire issue of the consequences of the ban. Again, the point we're making, why this report, I think, is so significant and so important, is because the idea that what happened is a continuing violation is not a part of the public discourse. We need to make that a part of the public discourse, that there is a continuing violation. And most fundamentally, now that in a sense, the heat and the dust has settled, we need to pin accountability on the government of Karnataka. How can the government of Karnataka deny the right to education to a section of its own citizens? That's the question we really need to ask. And we hope that the court will take cognizance of this continuing state of violation. Do any of you all want to comment on this, or shall we open it out to the next question? I'll read out the next question, so please decide if you want to answer this question. Okay. Gaurav Singh, who's a PUCL intern from Delhi, asks about the way forward for us as a society from this point. Allowing a community to wear a religious symbol in the school will open the Pandora's box for such demand. Then what will be the role of school uniforms at all? It's a very central, a very important question. I'll leave it to both either Aishwarya, Purna, or Shaima to answer it.
I'll just, if it's okay, I'll quickly respond. And then Shaima or Aishwarya can add on to it. This question of, hijab versus uniform is again a false binary, like hijab versus education. None of the women who went before the High Court or none of the women who went before the Supreme Court are trying to say they will not adhere to a uniform. All they are seeking is a reasonable accommodation. For instance, this South African case, which also the Supreme Court speaks about, where a student wanted to wear a nose stud to her school classroom, and the school denied permission to do it. And eventually, when the South African Constitutional Court was hearing it, they said, what constitutes somebody's faith and cultural practice, and what is inherent to their personal, expression, that is something they have to decide. And to this particular student, if that nose stud is an inherent part of her culture, her faith, her religion, and if it forms a part of her personhood, she has every right to assert it within a classroom space, and it's not going to disrupt the concept of uniform within an educational space. And in many senses, Justice Dhulia also adopts a similar line of argument when it comes to the hijab. He says that if the hijab, it could mean it could be of religious importance to a Muslim woman, it could be of cultural importance, political importance, it could be anything to her. But if she believes that it is integral to her personhood, then we do not have the place to deny that to her. Even the courts can't do it, is what Justice Dhulia says. So in many senses, I don't think it's a point of no return if we are able to make this reasonable accommodation for a community. Yeah.
Aishwarya, Shaima, would you like to comment? Okay.
We can move to the next question.
Okay, fine. The next question, it's not really a question, but I think it's a point which everybody can really reflect upon. The question is, do we have to start one more larger movement like the CAA NRC for awareness and attract the apex court's attention for a speedy hearing? Okay, I'll read out to you one more comment. So please, you'll decide whichever you want to go for. The next comment is by Radhika Chitkara. Thank you for the report in the press conference. Very useful to point out the deliberate misinterpretation of the High Court order. Not raising a question. The hijab. Okay, no. I think this is it's more a general comment. There's not really a question over there. Sorry. Okay. That's the only other comment we have as of now is on this point, is the question of a movement. How do you all see the way forward? You talked a little bit about the role of civil society. How do we see the role of, how do we bring about a change in appreciating the point which the report makes very strongly, which is that you can't close the gates of education to any section of society? How do we ensure that this has a wider resonance, a wider purchase? Is a question which is being asked by a friend on the chat.
Aishwarya Sharma, do you want to take that, please?
Well, whether it should be at the scale of the CA protest, anti-CA protests or not, this is an issue of that kind of importance. At a very core level, all of these students are right now being told that they're not going to be allowed to access higher education. They're not going to be allowed to have dreams, aspirations. A lot of the students have talked about wanting to become lawyers, doctors, scientists, physiotherapists. We have spoken, the conversations from the students have to be, the report for us is important for all of you to read, because these are the voices of the students that are standing out for us. And they're still saying that nobody came and listened to us. But the fact of the matter is, we're just regular people. We have our dreams. We want to lead our life. And right now, by being excluded from spaces, being harassed and humiliated, feeling absolutely ostracized from the rest of their own towns, their own villages in the district, they are feeling that they're not an equal part, they're not an equal citizen in the country. So this is an issue of that importance. This is an issue that requires us to pressure the government. This is an issue for us to pressure the government to immediately strike down that government order that they had issued, or immediately take it back, withdraw it, because this is an issue that concerns women's education, women's access to positions of power, ambitions, and jobs. This is an issue that's going to disempower thousands of women. The number that Arvind had mentioned in the beginning, about 1,010 students that the government presented in the Legislative Assembly, we believe that this is an underestimation. There are thousands more who have not been accounted for, who are completely been invisibilized, because the government is refusing to even conduct an inquiry, to even conduct a study. So these are not our point with this report. Is not just that we shouldn't close the gates to education, but the government has not just closed the gates. The government has invisibilized these students. They're not seen, they're not heard, and nobody is going and asking them what the experience was. So and Purna has highlighted that the range of violations that have taken place against the students are going to have very far-reaching consequences. Their self-confidence has been affected. Their access to professional careers have been affected, and even their feeling of just safety in public spaces. So they're not feeling like an equal citizen. So I'm not sure if that answers your question, but this is to us a matter of equal importance.
Yeah, just to add on to what Aishwarya was saying, I think the CAA part of it, what really brought out during the CAA protest was that it's a country's issue. It's not a community issue at all. So, everybody came together, protested for the country's it became that kind of a cause. It became such a, mass level kind of a cause. So I think we also need a more counter discourses, because the public space is now saturated with exclusion and those discourses, but we need to also make room, I think, for counter discourses where people have actually stood by each other, and that are also as sort of an antidote to what is being spread in terms of hate, or saturated in terms of repeatedly we are hearing the same thing over and over again. We probably need more of such kind of counter discourses to also help people understand that there are other stories too. So that would probably help all of us to know that there are more people like this. And then I don't know, that's probably what I wanted to say.
Thank you. I think there's a journalist from the Indian Express who wants to ask a question. Can we possibly?
Hi, am I audible?
Yeah.
Hi, good evening. My name is Sanal. My question is, although your report has listed the larger role of state machinery, the ABVP, and other groups, I don't find the role of TFI and CFI, which is now banned, and their role in extending the support to the Muslim girls because there are claims by certain colleges where, the principals who I've spoken to have said that the PFI and CFI groups are manipulating them, and they've asked them to wear the hijab deliberately, despite the High Court order that they're not supposed to wear. And why isn't that? I mean, I don't know. I've still yet to go through a full report, but is it there, or have you not mentioned it? So, if you can elaborate on the role of CFI and PFI, the band organization, in extending the support for the girls here.
Yeah, no, I think it's a good question. I think in some ways, if you go to the judgment of the Supreme Court, it gives you some part of the answer, in particular Justice Dulia's dissenting opinion. And the point he's making, which I think is a very important point to understand in the middle of all this heat and noise around, is that the question of the hijab, when he's taking it from the government college in Kundapura, was always there. Girls have been wearing it way, way before the one day arbitrarily being stopped from wearing it. And the point that Justice Dulia made is that post that the government issues a post facto notification which says that it allows CDC to prohibit the wearing of the hijab. So the point being made is outside the role of organizations, outside the role of people or organizations, the question of the wearing of the hijab has always been there. It's been as was indicated by the panelists. It's been an integral part of the diversity of this country. You don't need anybody to incite other people to wear the hijab. Again, look at the language. Incite somebody to wear the hijab, right? That seems almost, to my mind, it seems almost a oxymoron way of thinking about it. It's a false equivalence. My understanding of the report again is because what the report is mentioning is that the reason the role of the vigilante groups is brought up is that's about a question of a practice of intimidation. It's about a way in which the intimidation restricts one's ability to exercise the right to personhood or the right to expression, or the right in this case to wear the hijab. That's the point being made. So the equivalence, my understanding of the report is a false equivalence, but we welcome it. Please do look at the report a little more closely, see if that particular line of reasoning appeals to you, and we can have a longer conversation on this. Thank you. Thank you for your comment. I think there's one more question which we have from Prajwal Bhatt. She says, thank you for your report. It is heartbreaking. You mentioned about the role of the CDCs in enforcing a ban on the hijab. Many student testimonies mention how the CDC enforced the banning of headscarves. In your fieldwork, did you get a chance to look into the CDCs in different colleges? Is there publicly available information about these committees? Why is it that the local MLA is the head of the committee? And did you observe Muslim parents are a part of these committees? Yeah.
I'm sure Aishwarya also has a lot to say about this. I'll just quickly make some observations that we had made in a couple of districts. We did not easily find information about who's on the CDC, what's the composition of the CDC, etc. But one thing that local leaders also told us that was that CDCs were no longer a representative body. So, and in most colleges, they said that CDCs don't have a Muslim member also, forget having a parent.
Yes, I'll just take this. Just to clarify, you're talking about signs of resistance from the college administration against such a ban, right? So we have spoken to administrators of institutions, firstly run by Muslim trusts. We have spoken to administrators of students. We've spoken to a principal who specifically who felt that the ban shouldn't be implemented immediately because the students have nowhere else to go but tried. So the resistance as such came in the form of assistance to students, some teachers, some faculty, some heads of departments, some principals, very few, of course, who would try and help the students with the classwork that they're missing, who are trying and helping students with accessing their examinations. In fact, there have been we've met with the principal and teachers of a school in Hassan. And when we spoke to them, one of the things that they were telling us is most of these girls, because it is a small town, most of these girls have been in this school throughout their lives till class 10. And now for their SSLC exams, how can we tell them it's okay for them to remove their hijab? We don't want to tell them that. But how can we tell them to miss their exams? They've been with us for 10 years. So we see the way in which they have tried to help students continue their at least till the academic year, continue their studies. Many of them have, even in Hassan, they've gone and fought with the block education officer. They've tried to say that at least give them some space to remove their hijabs in privacy and dignity. There have been these efforts, of course, in very small pockets. This was not the dominant story, but there have been smaller efforts by some administrations, but largely the narrative also, whether on social media, whether the media, or whether the political leader statements, all of the things were saying that the High Court order says the ban must be imposed. So anyone who doesn't impose a ban is in violation of the High Court order. This is false, and this is what was being said. So this also prevented a lot of principals who told us that they're feeling helpless, that they don't know what else to do. They can't help the Muslim girls at all. So the larger inaction by college administration and the larger enforcement of the ban by college administration happened because of this misinterpretation. But in small pockets, there were some authorities, there were some principals who tried to still negotiate, who tried to fight, and who tried to still help the students.
Sorry, I think we'll just take two other questions, and also we'll combine with any closing comments all three of you may have. Feel free to take any of the two questions, as well as any closing comment you might have. The question is from Umapati from Edina. The state must compensate the students. You argued in your report, you urged in your report that the state must compensate the students for the losses they have suffered. Could you please elaborate? The other question is from Ajoy from the Supreme Court Observer. Ajoy says that at the risk of making a slippery slope argument, does the ban possibly open up the door for governments to impose more restrictions in public spaces in the interests of uniformity? Please feel free to take either of the two questions or any closing comments you may have. We can begin from Purna, Aishwarya, Shaima, any of you?
Shaima, would you like to take one of them? You're on mute, sorry.
Yeah, I think the first one, you guys should go ahead and respond to this.
So that was about the compensation. Do you want to take that, Aishwarya, or shall I go ahead?
No, go ahead. It's okay.
Yeah, so some of it, actually, I think the KSCPCR's, recommendation to the education department kind of sums up, what we would see as immediate kind of steps that the government of Karnataka should initiate. One is to, of course, permit the students who have lost out on a year to immediately take their examinations. Now that it's almost been a year since all of this has happened, that educational year cannot be returned to them, but at least there can be steps to ensure that at least the next cycle of exams that they're taking it's smooth for them. Secondly, of course, is the huge mental health cost of all of this that the girls are paying and that the community is paying at large, and definitely the state should take efforts to kind of make sure that they are well supported and well taken care of, when they're going through this very, very difficult phase. Many girls that we spoke to said, even though they were finally able to make it to the exam halls, they were blank, they were trembling, they were shaking, they're having sleepless nights, they started experiencing anxiety. So these are all things that the state government should come in to look into and extend support. Besides that, of course, definitely the one thing that Arvind was also pointing out about how especially the rights commissions in the state, be it the Human Rights Commission, the Women's Commission, and the Minorities Commission, all of them should definitely order an inquiry into what has happened, how this has happened, how have we let this go on for a year now, who are the people who are responsible for this, and what is it that we can do to hold them all accountable, beyond taking care of the educational aspects of the women, the mental health questions that have come out of this situation. It's also important for us to find those people who have been responsible for keeping this fire blazing for over a year now, and holding the futures of these women at ransom for so long. That is the crucial step, and the state government is of course not going to do it of its own accord, and the pressure then is on the civil society in Karnataka to push back and to put more pressure on the powers that be to ensure that this happens. Yeah.
I'd like to just add to that. I would request all of you also to go through chapter 11, which are the recommendations, particularly to each of the authorities, where we're not just talking about actions that that can repair the damage, but also actions that can deter this from happening again. One thing majorly that I want to talk about is the losses. When we talk about losses, a lot of these students who come from slightly poorer socioeconomic backgrounds, rural parts of districts in Karnataka, whose parents are farmers, workers, auto drivers, and daily wage laborers. Such students who study in PU colleges and degree colleges, we need to recognize, many of these students have shared with us that they're first generation learners in their family. And at the ages of 16, 17, and 18, they're coming up to us and saying, if I'm not going to study, what will happen to my community? This is the kind of burden that they carry, and this is the kind of responsibility that they happily carry, but they're struggling. And so when we're talking about losses, we have to think about it in a context of where the students' socioeconomic conditions, as well as their rights that have been violated. And Purna has already very eloquently talked about the kind of psychological distress that they have gone through.
Maybe.
Yeah, to the second, yeah, please go ahead.
Please go ahead, Shama. I was about to ask you to go ahead, please.
Yeah. So to the second question of how this ban could be extended to public spaces, I think that's already in the pipeline. There is a very real fear in the community, and there are already talks about UCC and how this can be very much, a precursor to such a move, and to extend such a ban to all public spaces is something that again, like all the things that Purna and Aishwarya were talking about, fear of going to education or to school, then extending that fear to even get out to any public space. And it's not only that, without the ban also, these kind of, I have at least come across in my fieldwork also, the kind of harassment or the kind of negative experiences that Muslim women have had just because they are dressed in a particular way, been asked to pulling off the hijab, or for example being asked to go back to your house and you cannot come out in this attire, although there is no such imposition, that there's no such ban. Still there are these experiences that I've also heard from my participants that already are there in the public spaces. But what was interesting about the judgment was that it categorically singled out one community and made this applicable only to one group of people. It was not about the idea of uniformity, but it was very clearly saying that this is not part of, because if they were to do it, they could not do it to all the religions. So it was done in a very strategic manner to target only one group of people by saying that there is no such requirement for Muslim women according to the Quran to wear the hijab and all of that. And exactly the point was that it could be cultural, it could be religious, it need not why is it required to prove that this is a part of a religious practice and to give evidence, which is not even, like even Puna pointed out and said that if this is integral to that person's identity, then there is not need to put so much scrutiny on a particular committee to prove that why everybody is not wearing it, or why is it that, where is it written, show us the proof. Those kind of questions are coming up when we discuss this kind of a ban also in a larger context.
Before concluding, one last, I think, important point which has been raised is if the team can share how you went about doing this report, who are the members of the team? How did you come up with such a, I think people want to know, such a comprehensive report? What was the process?
You want to take that, Aishwarya?
Sure. We started thinking about it in April and May last year, after we could see the very visible impact of the High Court interim order and the judgment. We also could see that a lot of the impact that a lot of what we're seeing on TV and on media was extremely violent in itself. So we figured, as PUCL, that there has to be more, and there has to be more that the students will want to tell us directly. Before all of this, in February, when the issue started, Purna was a part of a team that went from PUCL Karnataka and visited some students as a part of a solidarity visit. And the testimonies that came from students during that visit were really eye-opening and shocking as to how they are still struggling to just articulate that they want to finish their education, they want to pursue their degree college, they want to pursue masters, they want to pursue PhD. They were talking about their dreams, and they were talking about their dreams amidst a very, very hostile climate, a very, very violent and humiliating climate that they talked about. So the PUCL report started in this context, we visited 5 districts in total. We thought that our districts should be in different parts of Karnataka. So in coastal, we've gone to Dakshin Kannada and Udupi. We went to Raichur in North Karnataka. We went to Hassan, and in coastal, we also went to Shimoga. So these are the 5 districts we went to. We've spoken to students, and while we collaborated relied heavily on the support of local civil society organizations, activists, and individuals. We also met with administration officials, the deputy commissioner, the deputy director for public instruction, primary education, as well as police officials. So we met officials, and we also sought appointments and meetings to meet with college administrators and principals. After these meetings were done, these were testimonies that we sort of recorded, and we went through it over and over again to think about how can we frame this, not just in the sense of what happened and what the impact was, but to seriously and critically look at what are the kinds of violations of the rights of Muslim women students. And along with that, the report documents in detail the conversations we have had with the district administration, college administration, and police. One important chapter that came out of some secondary research inputs from Shaima, who's here, was the chapter on the hijab discourse. It's a chapter that places this issue amidst a larger global narrative about Muslim women and their choices to wear or not wear the hijab. So we've also through the last 7 months, we've also looked at media. We've also looked at social media coverage and the role of Hindutva vigilante forces. Another very, very crucial chapter that everybody in this press conference has to also read is the role of the media. It was written by our colleagues in PUCL and Campaign Against Hate Speech, who are Manvi and Swati Shivanan, and they were the authors for the chapter, and they highlight the kind of violations that the media should be charged guilty of, and they highlighted the ways in which they fueled hatred by comparing the hijab to the sindoor, making sure to assert that the hijab is not Indian, but everything Hindu is Indian. So the kind of narratives pushed by the media at that time and the kind of vigilante action, sting operations that completely violated the rights of the students, the sting operations inside the home of one particular Muslim women student. These are things that the media was doing at that time, and these were actions of the media that were extremely illegal. So that chapter talks about that. The recommendations looks at talking to all of the above, whatever authorities have told you. We ended on that note to return to them with serious actionable steps as to how to not just repair the damage that has been done, but to also make sure that sensitization is done of officials. Sensitization on gender, caste, and religion has to be done of officials, of colleges, of faculty, of teachers. These are a part of the recommendations that are there in Chapter 11.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, and I just want to also acknowledge that on this call itself, there are others who have really supported the team through and through in helping us think about the whole thing and giving us direction and inputs. A lot of them are here. You'll find their names also in the acknowledgement. But because we were talking about those of whom helped us pull this together, I just wanted to make that point. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you to Purna, Aishwarya, and Shaima for the sharing on the report itself. And I think the range of comments which we've got on the chat really seem to indicate that everybody or many people see that this is a very fundamental kind of violation which has been documented here. And I think the anxiety which you sense, at least in the comments, which you get in the comments, is the question of how do we take this forward now? So I think that's a larger question where we get together and debate and think of how we can take this forward. But congratulations to the team for really putting forward and making this case that we have to take this issue of the right to education seriously and move forward on this entire point. Thanking all members of the team and thanking everybody else for attending this conference. Thank you. I think we'll close on that note. Thank you again, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.